Good evening, Professor Nishikawa. We have here with us Professor Nishikawa Satoru from Japan. He's from JICA in Japan, one of the most respected names in earthquake disaster risk reduction. And we are really honored to have you here at NDMA. Yesterday we had a day-long workshop in which you were one of our star delegates and star speakers. We are very happy to welcome you. So today we will make a few questions from you, and we will request you to respond to our viewers. So before we start, can we have a very small introduction about yourself?
Okay, my name is Satoru Nishikawa. Right now, I'm the senior advisor at JICA for disaster reduction strategy. And in my career, I have long worked in the Japanese government, and especially in disaster management and disaster reduction. Also, I have worked in the UN at OCHA for international cooperation, international assistance to emergencies. And also, I was the executive director of the Asian Disaster Reduction Center. Prior to my job here in JICA, I was a professor at Nagoya University Disaster Mitigation Research Center. Currently, I'm also a specially appointed professor at Tohoku University International Research Institute of Disaster Science. So I think that's why I'm invited here. And also, I'm very happy to inform you that I'm involved in CDRI as well. And it's my great honor to be invited to the yesterday's big conference, and also today to be here at NDMA. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. It was very nice words from you. So we will start with a very simple question that the people who may be watching this, what is the key to disaster risk reduction on earthquakes, primarily earthquakes?
Yes. One of the difficulties in focusing on earthquakes is that it does not happen every year. Earthquakes are maybe some isolated events for many of the people, but if they come, it's really devastating. And also, we know that we can really save lives, reduce damage by good prevention, good preparedness. And the point is that if we have very resilient houses, resilient infrastructures, and resilient communities, the disaster itself can be greatly reduced. And that's the point about earthquakes. Since Japan has had so many earthquakes in the past, we know from our experience that it is possible to reduce the damage by disasters, and especially earthquakes. And that's the main message. How to prepare beforehand is the key.
Thank you. So India may not have so many earthquakes, but recently, yesterday when we were discussing with yourselves at the conference, it came to light that India has had great earthquakes in the 1800s, early 1900s, and then last few years we had one in Kashmir, one in Sikkim, the one in Nepal was very close. Last year there were several in Afghanistan and Nepal. So the problem is they're still there for us, it's just that they're not so frequent. So how does a person who lives in a village in the Himalaya mountains, if he's going to be building a house starting tomorrow, what should he do?
Well, I would suggest that just add something to make your new house stronger than before. The traditional brick or stone masonry is quite weak against earthquakes. But if you have a very strong door sill and the window sill, that already makes the masonry structure much stronger than the conventional masonry structure. And another way is to make your bedroom, the room that you're going to sleep, stronger than others. Because when sleeping, the people are most vulnerable. If they are maybe sitting or standing, if you feel an earthquake, you can immediately jump out. But if you're sleeping, it's quite difficult to react immediately. And that very simple thing saves lives. That's the lessons that we have learned in many of the earthquakes in Japan. So add additional something in your house to save your life and your family's life. And also, it's not necessarily the house itself that might kill people. It may be a falling furniture, which may hurt your family, especially small babies. So when you place furniture in your room, make sure that even if in case of earthquakes, it does not fall on your baby's bed. And it's, as I'll say, if you can imagine what may happen, you can prepare. Yeah.
So that's a very fine suggestion, that when you're making a house, you make a strong door and a strong windowsill. So that will help and make your bedroom the strongest.
Yes.
So what about the roof? What do you do for a roof for a small house in the hills?
Well, I would suggest that heavy roofs might be a big risk. If the roof is light, it gives less burden on the structure. But in the very cold weather and very hot weather, you may wish to avoid light roofs because it does not insulate the heat or the cold. But instead of having a very heavy roof, I would recommend to have a lighter roof with insulation, light insulation.
Light roof with insulation.
Yes.
Excellent. These are very good suggestions.
Yes.
And what is your general advice to us on how to raise awareness about proper construction of houses?
Yes, because, like Japan, India has had several tragic earthquake disasters. And the lessons learned on each of these earthquakes are already recorded. And if those facts are known to the people, then people can understand what is earthquake risk. And sometimes the news of the earthquake is on the newspaper, but it does not give you the details of how the actual damages are. For example, in Japan, when I was working in the Cabinet Office Disaster Management, I started a new project called Ichi Ichi Mai. Ichi Ichi Mai in Japanese means the day before the disaster. And this is a new methodology for raising awareness. What we did is that after a major disaster, we go maybe 3 or 5 years later, after everything is settled down, we go to the affected site and ask the people who have really suffered from that earthquake, or who have responded to the earthquake, or who have struggled to recover after the earthquake, and ask them to come together and please tell us your experience. And especially we pose the question, what would you do if you were back one day before that earthquake? Then they will start telling us how they suffered, what were their regrets, what were their mistakes, what were useful. And these are documented and shared in the Japanese Cabinet Office Disaster Management website for everybody to use, because there would be so many episodes. For example, one young man, he was living alone. He does not cook, so he had no reserve food stocks in his apartment. So after the earthquake, he wanted to have some food to buy in the supermarkets, but already everything was sold out. So he wanted to have food, but he had no stockpiles. So he said that he really almost starved to death. Even if he was not injured, no damage to his house, but he didn't have the stockpiles of food. So he told us honestly, If he was back one day before the disaster, he would have bought canned food. So that's one good lesson. Also, there's another story where there was a couple, a young couple, the wife was pregnant, and when they were at the maternity hospital for her checkup, the earthquake came. And the nurses had taken good care of her, the pregnant wife, and afterwards they went home to the apartment. But inside the apartment, it was a total mess because all the furnitures had toppled down, everything was in a mess. So he had to spend the night with his pregnant wife in the small car, which was quite a difficulty for the pregnant wife. So his lesson is that if he was back one day before the disaster, he would have cleaned the room and get rid of useless items out of his very small apartment. So that's another good lesson.
Excellent. That's a very good initiative to bring in awareness, make people aware. So suppose we went back to some places which have had similar earthquakes, and if not 5-10 years later, ask them for their lessons and put them out on the website. That's a very good suggestion to raise awareness in the communities that are at risk. So at the conference, you were telling us something very interesting about how Japan is using early warning systems on for earthquakes at the hospitals. So from the lady with the pregnancy, maybe you can start with the hospital example, then go to airport, bullet trains.
Yes, because we in Japan, we are using the so-called real-time earthquake early warning system. This is something a little bit technical. In earthquakes, there are two types of waves. The primary pressure wave, which travels very quickly, and the secondary shake wave, which is slower, but that shake wave destroys houses or buildings and makes the damage. And by catching the very quick primary pressure wave, we can detect that a big shake wave is coming afterwards, maybe in 5 seconds, 10 seconds, or 60 seconds. By using this 5 or 10 or 60 seconds, we can save lives. For example, if in a big hospital, surgery was being done, and if the medical doctors know that a big shake is coming in, let's say, 30 seconds, the medical doctor and the nurses, if they are trained, they can protect the patient and secure the minimal security measures for the patients, so that if they are not struck at a surprise.
Okay.
Also, in the case of the 2011 big earthquake in Japan, the Tokyo Haneda Airport is the busiest airport in Japan. And there were so many airplanes trying to land on the runway of the Haneda Airport. But the control tower received the real-time earthquake early warning. And they immediately ordered all the airplanes which were approaching Haneda Airport to land, to divert and escape out of the airspace, and to detour to other airports immediately. So in 5 or 10 seconds, that can be done if the professionals are trained beforehand on how to react to these real-time earthquake early warning system. Also, in Japan, we have the very high-speed bullet trains. They have an automatic system that if they detect a P wave, they would automatically set the emergency brakes on, so that before the real shaking comes, the train will speed down and stop safely. And that really worked in the case of the great earthquake and tsunami in March 2011.
Oh, thank you. And you were also mentioning something very close to every consumer's heart. That was about gas meters.
Yes.
So if you could connect this to
Yes.
your first experience in the 30s when you had the big earthquake, where there were a lot of fires.
Yes.
And then now that every home has a gas connection.
Yes, yes.
So what do you do for that?
Yeah. In all the households which use gas, the gas meters are equipped with a very small seismometer inside. And if that gas meter detects a certain shaking, it automatically stops the gas supply to the household. The purpose is to avoid urban fires in case of big earthquakes. The reason is that back in 1923, Tokyo and Yokohama was totally burnt down right after a big earthquake. At that time, most of the Japanese houses were made of wood. The houses fell down with the earthquake, caught fire, and half of Tokyo, most of Yokohama was totally burnt down. So how to prevent fires after a big earthquake is one of the big issues that we have had. So with modern technology, now we have the very small seismometers that can be equipped inside the small gas control meters, which governs each household's gas supply. So that is quite efficient.
Thank you. That's an excellent point that you're making, that instead of all the private utility providers waiting for government to do something, and all the time they're waiting for government to do something, the private utility providers should start bringing in small seismometers. They should use it for these matters.
Yes.
And it's a very interesting example of how the non-government world also participates in
Yes.
earthquake risk reduction.
And also, it's an advantage for the gas company as well, because if they can avoid the fires and accidents by these seismometers, by very small seismometers, that small additional investment for the small seismometer inside the gas meter, it's nothing compared to a big gas explosion. So they know the value. So for the gas companies, it's also a value for safety. Yeah.
Okay,
So
great.
I would emphasize that if especially the private sector sees the value of resilience and safety, it's worth investing a little bit for safety. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So, taking you to a slightly larger question, away from the retail part, because we were right now talking about what consumers should do, what companies should do. So, between India and Japan, there are several decades of close relationship.
yes.
And on several fronts, disaster risk reduction is one of them. Earthquake disaster risk reduction is a much smaller but very important segment. So how do you think we should take our cooperation forward so that we can do things on the ground and start making a big difference?
Yes, because earthquakes do not happen every year. So we do not have to wait for both countries to share the same tragedies. We can share the lessons and we can learn from each other, and especially through various channels. I myself, I have been in the government. I have been the Nagoya University. Right now I'm with JICA and also Tokyo University. And we can have various channels among India and Japan, through the governmental channel, through the academic channel, or maybe the private sector channel. And the more channels we have, we can share more experiences. And through, I'll say, and also it would be good to have, I'll say, a kind of an interdisciplinary mix of experts that we can bring together. Yesterday was a good example. We had university professors, we had governmental people, we had representatives of the cities, and that mix also brings a good networking, and by networking we would be able to forge new ideas, and we can learn from various examples. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, is there any other advice you'd like to give us as NDMA on what we should do to that original question I asked on awareness and public awareness? How do we incubate stakeholder interest? Is there something more you would like to say after which we can end our discussion?
Yes. In my career in the Cabinet Office Disaster Management, I try to reach out to various non-traditional sectors regarding disasters. For example, I approach the Parents and Teachers Association. I approach the consumer cooperative unions if they would be interested in safety of the society. And sometimes they agree, and that broadens the support for the governmental disaster management or disaster reduction activities. Because, well, disasters do not only strike governments, it strikes the whole society. So there's a need for the whole society to have good consciousness on earthquakes, and having a consciousness is important. But after a big disaster, everybody is suddenly aware. But in few years, that awareness always disappears. That's human nature. However, by having a broad range of supporters, this, I would say, support would sustain. Especially for earthquakes, the most important thing is sustain the efforts for earthquake disaster reduction over the decades, because you don't know when the next big earthquake may hit. That's the uncertainty of earthquakes, but we know from my experience, if we're well prepared, that casualties, the economic damage can be reduced.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nishikawa. That was an excellent conversation.
Yes.
We look forward to meeting you again.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.